Hi, and welcome to Goddess Storytime. This is a new series that I am going to do once a month. Every month, we're going to have a different theme, which highlights a different goddess, and I'm going to sit down and have story time with you. This was actually the brainchild of a friend of mine. One day, we were kind of talking about her dating life, and I brought in a particular goddess and told her the story about it and how it could be applied in her life. And she's also been to some of my events, and she said, I would love it if there was like a podcast or some sort of weekly or regular way that I could sit down and just like sit by the fire and have you tell goddess stories. And that's something I've heard before. It's a big part of the work I do is sharing these stories. And the goddesses from all of these different cultures, I believe these stories were originally ways that a community shared with people, really a way for people to understand an aspect of themselves, a part of themselves, a power, through hearing this goddess mythology or this goddess story. And many of the stories come from primarily oral traditions. So I imagine that a mother would have told her daughter these stories, or that an elder woman in a tribe would have sat around and told the younger woman these stories about a particular goddess or the different goddesses, so that these young women could learn about aspects of themselves, aspects of the psyche, aspects of their power. And so that's what we're going to do. So I don't have a fireplace, but I do have a candle lit, and I recommend you getting like a cup of tea and cozying up, and we're going to do goddess story time this month with Aphrodite and Venus. Venus is the Roman version of the Greek goddess Aphrodite, and right now it is Valentine's Day month. It's February. So romance, roses, affairs of the heart, and the eros are on everybody's mind. And what better goddess to talk about that with or explore with than Aphrodite? And of all the goddesses I teach, I feel like she's one that people have some familiarity with, at least. She's one of the most famous goddesses in the West anyway. And she is the Greek goddess of eros, of erotic love, sensuality, sexuality, all things beautiful, things that feed the senses, art, music, what else? Things that bring harmony. These are all Venus Aphrodite traits, but particularly she is known as this goddess who is undeniably attractive, particularly to the masculine, that she can kind of get whatever she desires, like through her feminine energy in some way. She's the ultimate seductress, but I also want to share with you that there is a real innocent quality to her that I like to connect in through, rather than the more sometimes I think people can think of her as being a little bit more of a manipulative and seductive character, which she certainly has certain aspects like that. But the pure, undiluted Aphrodite essence is really an erotic innocence. And it's something that is so innate and so natural to all women. And when we activate that within ourselves, we do become naturally very magnetic. And I want to tell you a bit about her story so you can learn about her and how to access her within yourself, because she's a part of every woman. All of these goddesses are a part of our psyche, a part of ourself that we just want to learn how to bring out and accent. And first I'm going to show you some images, because I feel like you already start to get such a feel from the image itself. And here is a very famous image of the birth of Venus. And here's another one. And just notice as I show you these images, very low tech here. I find it easier just to hold up these images than try and edit in some images. I love this one. This is one of my very favorites. I just love the way she's so just like lounged out in that shell. And here's another great one. And you might notice she's not wearing any clothes in any of these. She's raw, she's naked, she's really comfortable in her skin, in her flesh. You might notice as well that she's got a full body. She's not like super bony or something, She's got nice hips. I think, a very natural woman's body. But what you might notice is that it's like there's not an ounce of tension in this woman's body, right? It's like she is very relaxed. And she's very much in a being state. It's not about doing, she's not thinking about trying to get shit done. She is in the experience of being embodied, being in her senses. Another thing that you may notice is that she's very into herself, meaning she's inwardly focused. She's into her sensation. She's not really paying attention to what's going on with the other people so much. She's the center of attention. Everyone's focus is on her, but she doesn't look like she's trying to get that. She's actually just in the depth of her own sensation and experience. And those images are all basically, she's almost always captured coming out of the ocean, right by the ocean. And that's related to her birth story, which I'm going to share with you. And very often the different mythologies of the goddesses, the stories that I'll share are about their birth, because their birth, it's like, how do we birth her within ourselves? Where do we find her? How does she arise? And so the story gives us some information about that. Now, Aphrodite is born out of the ocean. And the ocean, Mother Ocean, this great, like, primal, elemental, the elemental quality, this feminine elemental quality of the ocean is actually her mother. That's the feminine energy that she's born out of. And the father, interestingly, is actually a severed penis. And it's the penis of, I believe, Uranus. It's a father and a son. Actually, I think maybe Kronos is the father, Uranus is the son. And the son decides to cut off his own father's penis and testicles. He dismembers him and then throws it into the ocean. And so there's a whole thing going on there about, father-son, power, domination. And but this disembodied Titan penis gets thrown into the ocean and is kind of bobbing in the waves and the foam of the ocean. And so that's the masculine energy. And then the feminine energy of the ocean, they come together. And out of that, Aphrodite is born. Now, there are a few different versions of her birth story, but that's the most common one. And I think it's interesting because it's not a particular masculine procreative energy that like wants to create a child. It's not a particular female that like incubates her. It's this elemental, like masculine, feminine quality. And she is born fully formed in this woman's body. And she's never a child. She's born fully formed like that and recognized immediately as the goddess of beauty, sensuality, love. And she's taken to Mount Olympus, where all the Olympian gods hang out. And she is married off to Hephaestus. And then again, there are a few different versions of the story. In some versions, she chooses him. In some versions, he competes and wins her. In some versions, Zeus, who's like the main primary god, he chooses Hephaestus for her. But at any rate, that's who she marries. And Hephaestus is an interesting choice for Aphrodite. He is the god of the forge, metalworking. He makes all of the special sacred weapons that the gods carry. Their shields, their weapons. And it's, metallurgy or, metalworking was very important at that time. Like in ancient times, that was like the height of sophistication. It was really important. The person who made the weapons had a high status in a society. The person who could work with metal, it was considered something very high level. Yet at the same time, there's a certain element of kind of like a blue collar quality too. It's an interesting choice. He's not the most like snazzy kind of guy. Like he's down, like kind of in the dark in front of the forge in the fire, pounding away, probably kind of like sweaty. And you know, one thing about that is that, you know, that energy can be very masculine. So for a very feminine woman, I could see that that could be very attractive, right? This sort of man who works with his hands and is embodied, and he's not like super mental. He's in his physical self and using that day to day. He's also called the lame god because he has a bad leg. And it's just not necessarily who you might think she would be with. But what's interesting about Aphrodite is that she is the one goddess out of all of the Greek and Roman goddesses who has freedom sexually. She has a sovereignty that none of the other goddesses have. Many of the goddesses are virgin goddesses, such as Artemis, Athena, Hestia, and they are complete unto themselves, and they never partner, and they're not associated with a man, and it's never spoken. Their sexual and romantic adventures are never spoken about. And of course, that's an important aspect for us as women. But for these goddesses, there's the virginal goddesses, and then there's a certain group of goddesses that are married, and very often they become kind of secondary to the male partner, and then they're almost feel, because the Greek and Roman tradition were already in a little bit of a patriarchal society, so it almost feels like they become they're so highly associated. It's almost like they're the property. They don't seem to have a lot of freedom. But Aphrodite, you know, she marries Hephaestus, and she has lots of other lovers. She has a long-time love affair with Ares, or Mars. He is the god of war. And he's a little more like the slick type. Like, I feel like if he lived in LA today, he'd probably drive a Porsche, be very slick dresser. He's kind of maybe more what you would think Aphrodite would be with. She's also has Poseidon, the god of the ocean, as her lover, which makes a lot of sense since she was born out of the ocean and that fluid quality. And she also has many human, like mortal lovers as well. And so she has this freedom and this sovereignty. And, you know, we're not necessarily meant to take these stories literally. Like, if you awaken Aphrodite within you, that means that you're not going to be able to be faithful to your partner. That's not the case. It means, though, that you're going to feel a certain freedom and liberation and empowerment in connection to your sexuality, and be able to be in relationship and also have a real sense of your own identity and power. And so that's a bit about Aphrodite's story. And, you know, when we awaken her within ourselves, we connect to that part of ourselves that is irresistible. We awaken that feminine energy within us that draws to us and attracts to us in an easeful way, in a magnetic way. I feel like when that becomes awake within me, life becomes more magical. Like, I'll have an experience, like actually yesterday, because I think I was already starting to be preparing for, you know, we have a live event where we're going to be working with Venus and Aphrodite, and I knew I wanted to make this video for you. So I'm already starting to kind of conjure with the energy. And I had this experience when I went grocery shopping where it was just like everyone that I was interacting with, every interaction I had was super magical and sweet and alive, and people wanted to help me. And it's like there's just a kind of extra magic that comes into our life, and an easefulness and a grace when we've got her energy moving through us. And there's a way that it's like life moves from being kind of black and white and kind of more rigid to something that feels very technicolor, very alive, very rich, because we are in our senses. And I always think that it's a little bit like a woman who is moving that Aphrodite Shakti, or that Aphrodite energy through her, is magnetic in the way like a little baby is. If you've ever been somewhere and someone walks in with a little baby and you notice that all the attention goes towards that child or a puppy, it's like that. It's sort of like there's just this magnetic quality. And why do we do that? Why, when a baby is in the room, are we just suddenly hypnotized and magnetized towards it? my feeling about this is that it's because a child is so alive in the moment. They're not, little babies haven't learned to be in their head, projecting into the future, or thinking about the past, worrying about things. They're just alive in the moment they're in, fully awake to their senses. And to us, that's like, it's magical, it's golden, it's something that we are so drawn to, because as we mature and we become adults, we become more and more removed from that, and it feels rare to be in contact with someone who is so alive. Yet we really have the opportunity to be that alive, and that's what Aphrodite reminds us of. She reminds us that we have access to this all the time, and that it's really our birthright to be that alive, that embodied and present, and then from that space, the ease that comes with it. And it's about pleasure. Anytime we're connected to our senses and we're in our pleasure, we become Aphrodite. And so it's not about what we look like. It's not these external things that we think define a female's attractiveness or beauty. It's actually this quality of aliveness and connection to pleasure and sensuality. And it's our sexual life force as well, pumping through us. One last thing that I want to say about it is, when Aphrodite first really awoke within me, or I connected and got her transmission, and that happens with most of the goddesses I teach, like that goddess will just kind of come and speak to me in a certain moment, and I'll get like, oh, this is her transmission. And this is going back many years. I think it might have been like 2011 in the spring. I was sitting in my living room on the floor in meditation. Not necessarily where you think you're going to find Aphrodite, right? It's like in sex or something. No, in meditation. I was sitting in meditation, very deep in this space of feeling the breath. And I was having this experience of each breath being so pleasurable that it felt like almost so much pleasure I couldn't even bear it. Just like to inhale and feel the experience of the air coming into my body. It was like orgasmic pleasure. And then the exhale. And then the next inhale. And I was having this experience of, wow, oh my God, this is so delicious. I don't ever want to come out of this meditation. Like, I just want to stay here because it's so magnificent. Breath. And then I realized, of course, my timer was set, my meditation was done. And I came out of the meditation and I walked into my kitchen and I had an orange on my counter and I cut it with the knife into slices, and I put a slice into my mouth and I bit into the orange, and it was like the flavor of the orange was orgasmic in my mouth, and like the juice was kind of like dribbling down the sides of my cheeks, and I was just in ecstasy that an orange could taste this good. And it was like, wow, how amazing is it that I am in a human body and I get to have this experience and this flavor and this level of aliveness. It's like and in that moment I recognized, oh, this is Aphrodite's transmission, and it's a spiritual awakening, and it's an invitation for us to be so alive in our senses that we're having the experience of heaven on earth. And that's what she's inviting us into, is this exquisite union of our senses with the external world that brings us into this state of connection to pleasure and aliveness. And so what I'm going to leave you with is just an invitation for you to invite her in by slowing down and coming into your senses. So feeling, like touching your thighs, touching your breasts, your belly, touching texture of something. I have this like sheepskin back here. It's just like feeling the texture of something, tasting something with your full awareness. Smelling a flower and just really letting it come fully into yourself. Those are ways that you can invite Aphrodite into your own experience. Obviously, there's a lot more I could say about her, but I want to keep this under 20 minutes. So there you are. This is your Aphrodite Storytime, our Goddess Storytime Session 1. And please feel free to reach out to me with questions or anything that this brings up for you. I would love to hear from you. All right, bye-bye.